In this review video, we're looking at the Gilded Age. This is a term coined by Mark Twain. This period covers from the 1870s to around 1900, and this is a period of time marked by tremendous economic and industrial growth. It's also a period of tremendous social change in this country. And beneath this thin layer of gold, as Mark Twain would call it, lie deep-seated issues of inequality, corruption, and social unrest. Let's get started. The first area that we want to focus on in our review of the Gilded Age is to look at the closing of the Western frontier. There are two major factors that led to the closing of the Western frontier, the first being the Homestead Act of 1862, granting American citizens 160 acres of land for free as long as you could improve it over a 5-year period of time. The second factor that led to the closing of the Western frontier is the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. This is going to connect East Coast to West Coast, and then eventually when other railroad companies kind of hitch their wagons, if you will, to the transcontinental rail line, this will connect our country north, south, east, and west like never before, creating a national economy for the first time in our country's history. This is going to lead to a consumer economy too, where you're going to see companies like Sears and Roebuck create catalogs that allow people in California to look through this catalog and see if there's something that they want. They can purchase it, and then they can use the rail lines to ship those goods to them. Additionally, this is going to lead to big business. We're going to talk about that later in the video, though. But these Western settlers weren't moving into uninhabited land. They were moving into territories that were already inhabited by Native Americans. This will lead to things like the Sioux Wars and the famous Battle at Little Bighorn, which will eventually lead the federal government to implement the reservation system, but the reservation system doesn't work. And so we implement the Dawes Act, which will force assimilation on these Native people groups, breaking up and doing away with the reservation system in this country. One of the last final stands of resistance in the Native American people groups will be Ghost Dance, which will end in a bloodbath, and it will end in failure as well. But you also have things like the Klondike Gold Rush in the Yukon Territory, and also before that in 1848 and 49, the California Gold Rush, that have led people out west to look for not only gold, but also silver and other minerals that can be utilized for profit. This leads the U.S. Census Bureau to deem that the Western frontier is now closed and settled, leading Frederick Jackson Turner to write his thesis where he will allude to the problem of the Western frontier closing, warning that it could become a major detriment to the United States because the Western frontier was a part of who we were as Americans. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad not only helped bring an end to the Western frontier, but it also helped industries in this country thrive like never before. Companies like the Standard Oil Company, ran by John D. Rockefeller, or Andrew Carnegie's steel plant, they thrived because of the railroads. But also railroad companies owned by guys like Cornelius Vanderbilt and Leland Stanford and Tom Scott. All of these guys benefited from the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad and thus the thriving economy. This is going to lead to a tremendous amount of wealth moving into the hands of a few in this country, and we're going to see unprecedented wealth like never before. In fact, when you look at today's time period, there are still studies, depending on how much inflation you include. John D. Rockefeller is still considered one of the wealthiest people to have ever lived in this country. That's crazy to think about. However, the gap between the rich and the poor was widening significantly during this period of time. And this is going to lead to frustrations from this new industrial working class that we see in this country. We'll see the creation of labor unions, the first of which being the Knights of Labor, and then the second being the American Federation of Labor. Their job is to fight for the industrial worker to help them receive better wages, better hours, and better working conditions, all things that the industrial workers in this country at this time were struggling with. But it wasn't just industrial workers who were struggling economically. Farmers also struggled financially. And the reason they're struggling so much is because they have way more land than they need. They have this new, expensive, very efficient machinery, things like the McCormick Reaper, that make their lives so much more efficient and easier, but they can't pay for these things up front, so they buy them on credit. But in their minds, they're thinking, we'll just produce more, and the more we produce, the more we'll be able to sell. But this is a clear violation of the most important economic principle that there is, and that is supply and demand. The more they produce of something, the more the price will plummet. And we have talked about this ad nauseum during this class this year. The more you produce of anything, the more the price goes down. And farmers are struggling with this concept because they're trying to pull themselves up out of the debt that they've created. At the same time, the more they produce, the more the prices plummet. The other issue that farmers are facing are all these big commercial farmers that are coming in and trying to poach on them. They can't keep up with these big commercial farmers, and so a lot of times these farmers end up going belly up, or they sell their farm to these big commercial farms. This leads to the Grange movement, and the Grange movement is going to promote co-ops. While the Grange movement is a short-lived movement, it is effective in leading to the populist movement. The populist movement is for and by the farmers, and this will lead to an actual political party known as the Populist Party. They'll run a candidate in 1892's presidential election, in James Weaver. They'll also do so well in 1892 that the Democratic Party in 1896 will say, hey, let's absorb the Populist Party and let's take some of the principles from this party. Things like income tax, things like direct election of senators, things like women's suffrage, things like the unlimited coinage of silver, and let's add that to our political agenda. Pretty cool to think about. And while the populists never really achieved political office, they will affect change through their efforts. And when we get to the Progressive Era, we'll look at the Progressive Era amendments of 16, 17, 18, and 19. Those are things that these populists were pushing for during the Gilded Age. Alongside the economic disparities during the Gilded Age, this period was also marked by tremendous political corruption. Political machines such as Tammany Hall in New York City wielded immense power through bribery, patronage, and voter fraud. Figures like William Boss Tweed became infamous for their manipulation of the political system for personal gain. It won't be until we get to the Chester A. Arthur administration where we will see the act of the spoils system broken down. This will be done through the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which will require civil service tests to be given to qualify people for certain positions instead of the way it was done before by political loyalty. During this period of time, we're also going to see a rise in nativism. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have so many immigrants coming over from both Europe and Asia that this leads a lot of Americans to put pressure on their politicians to do something about the immigration problem. This leads the federal government to focus their attention on the Chinese immigrants in this country, who a lot of them are working on the railroads. Some are in the Northeast. This is a growing concern for many Americans, and because of this pressure, we see the Chinese Exclusion Act passed and signed into law by then President Chester A. Arthur. This immigration law will put a ban on Chinese immigration for 10 years. But despite these challenges, the Gilded Age also saw significant advancements in technology, innovation, and culture. The invention of the light bulb by Thomas Edison, the expansion of the telegraph and telephone networks, and the rise of mass production techniques all contributed to a period of rapid modernization. Besides technological advancements, the Gilded Age was a time of cultural flourishing with the rise of literature, architecture, and art. Figures like Mark Twain, who coined the Gilded Age, but also Edith Wharton and Louis Sullivan, helped to capture the spirit of the age through their works, exploring themes of social change, identity, and the American dream. However, it's important to recognize that the term gilded implies a layer of gold covering something of lesser value beneath. Indeed, beneath the shiny veneer of progress and prosperity lay the harsh realities of inequality, corruption, and social injustice. That's all the time we have for today. If you liked the video, click below. Also subscribe to our channel. And if you know someone who would benefit from this video, someone who's getting ready to take their end of the year test, please share this with them so that we can help as many people as we possibly can. We'll see you next time.